Today's painting session with oils is going to take us to the beach. Let's come up to the canvas and see a little bit of a sketch I've put on here. This is just a few basic lines for a horizon that starts about mid-canvas, but there'll be sand dunes. And our perspective illusion is going to be where we're kind of not looking out to the ocean, but looking down the beach. So we're going to have a vanishing point kind of right about center canvas. I have a couple of photographs that I took last time I was up in Fort Walton Beach, and it has very similar lines of vanishing points where you're not coming and walking down the beach and looking directly out to the ocean, but you're looking off to the right, where this happened to be a pier here, and this was looking the opposite directions. So I took these photographs to create an interesting shoreline illusion, and that's what we're going to try to capture in this. Only we'll have the water coming in from the left and a little bit of a sand dune illusion coming. The late evening sky, you can put any kind of sky in this, and I'm just going to put some billowy, wispy clouds. This one will go fairly fast because the basic lines, I have just a little bit of brown on the canvas, and our perspective point and vanishing point is way back here on the horizon. And I had a little pencil sketch, but we'll restate that sketch just by finding where the water is coming in from the left, and of course the water is flat, so you want to pull that with a horizontal flow. And then the beach is narrower in the distance and will be widening and coming over a little bit to the left. Okay, so that's where we're going to have it. We may even bring that down a little this way and then let that just kind of go uphill. So there's going to be a slight uplift to the left of the sand, but not too steep. And then the sand dunes and all are going to be coming down this direction and floating down. We'll put little grasses on there. So that's basically our perspective. By the lines or linear perspective, they will pull us into the distance. So let's start blocking in, and I've put a little bit of white, a thin coating of the base white, or the basic white on the canvas, so that the paints will flow a little more easily on it. You can either oil the canvas or you can put in the base white. So usually just a little bit of a soft, more liquid white type of a medium, and it's got more oils in it. So there is just a touch on the canvas so that my paints will slide and come off the brush more easily. I've got another brush ready with a little bit of a pinkish tint so I can get a little late evening glow, and I'm going to come up to the canvas and start kind of way above the horizon line and put a little bit of this blushy late evening light just above where I want the back ocean. Now a little bit of that brushed out of the brush won't hurt, but I don't want much of this color. Immediately I'm going to go down to the canvas and add a little bit more of my soft white, lighten it up, and in fact if it doesn't lighten quickly, I'll wipe the brush to take some of the tinting of the color out, and then I'll have a little more white to bleach a little bit more. This is going to be in the foam that's breaking up on the shore. I'm going to just kind of dance that over, following that little line. I'm going to let the corner of the brush follow right on the shoreline. Now white's going to go on that later, but I want to get that established with a little bit of coloring reflecting that. Then we're going to come and pull on the other side. We're going to warm up the color with a little ochre, but a little bit of brown in that. I want to keep it a little bit tannish. So we'll get this a little bit of a grayed, warm gray, and see if this will work. Let's go over here to the sand area. Yeah, that'll work fine for an underpainting part, and then we'll bring other colors on top. While I've got these lighter colors, I want to go ahead and get the sand applied. Get smaller in the distance. And this is the drier sand. This area in here is going to be wet sand, so it's going to be more shadowed and darker. And I'll be using more of the sky colors for that. Now as we go up to the sky, I want to start introducing some of the blues. I will use the same brush, and I'll introduce a little speck of Prussian and start bringing in kind of a blue right into that same pinkish tint. So I get a nice soft coloring, and we'll start kind of swirling and twisting the brush to give kind of an atmospheric light to it. And I twist the brush. I can't hold it horizontal. Kind of just hold the brush, lock your hand into position, and then stir with your arm more so than with the full length of the brush. Lock it in, block it in, and it flows on a little easier because of that light coating of white paint. All right, that's just giving me a little bit of color interest in the sky. Now as we develop it, we can bring it a little bluer, and you can use any color blue, a little cerulean blue or a little Prussian blue, whatever you find is of color interest. I got a little too much, so I'm going to wipe the brush out again, and that takes out most of the tinting, and then I just bleach it out a little bit with a little bit more white. Let's get a little bluer tint for that upper sky area. Again, I keep my brush kind of loosely swirling so I get a nice airy look to my sky. maybe a little bit down over here, just over the top area. And we're going to have some shadow clouds. This coloring would be very nice reflective in the water, so while we have it on the brush, let's go down into the water area. I'm adding just a little bit of phthalo green into it, so I'll get a slight tinting, and when I'm in the water, I don't swirl the brush, I just kind of streak it horizontally, and I want this to connect into the pink. I want to go beyond the pink, I want it to connect in for shallow water. Now that'll be darker again in the distance, but I'm going to go ahead and base it in with this. Okay, very little down here on the bottom. We'll just make that kind of white foam up in the shore. That worked pretty well. Let's go in and try a little brown in this mixture to gray that. And the brown, which is more of a burnt umber type brown, mixed into the blue, will give a little bit of a greenish gray. Okay, we're up into the sky again. This is going to be kind of clouds. You can kind of stab the brush and poke in some little blotches and then soften them in so that you get lots of color interest up in your sky. And we'll come over here to the left and darken a little bit over here to the left edge. So as I kind of push and twist and swirl the brush, I get lots of different colors playing up into the sky area. And then I'll use a smaller brush to make it more specific as to a cloud bank. Okay, that's fair for a base in of initial coloring. And sometimes that will do the job for you just like it is. Using some of the same cloud color, I'm going to go just a little bit into the shadowy area where the sand would be wet and fill in between the lighter beach color. And again, I'm looking for a base tint, and I'm not looking to put the lines in exact. And it has a little bit of that last minute lay down as it goes into the water. There we go. Let's get the canvas covered with a block in. Maybe a little more brown in that because the sand would have a little more warmth to it. Yeah, that's better right there. And even leave some of the other colors kind of showing through as it gets lighter in the distance. In the water, we'll go a little bit more blue into this brown. And actually, I just look for some interesting colors. I'm not looking for too much specific, but this is darker and more shadowed. And I'm coming from the deeper water and softening up into the lighter water. And since this is just my first application of paint, I can adjust any of the tints as I progress through the painting. Okay, a little bit more shadow where we're going to have some sand dunes in the distance. We're going to bring lights on the grasses. You don't want to get too much paint on the canvas because then it's going to be harder to put your lights on. And these are not my light lights. I'm looking just for a base tint to build on. I think I want to go get a little more rusty color into this. Putting a little orange into my blue to gray it, but also to warm it. Yeah, that's better right there. Okay, so that's gotten a little bit of paint all over the canvas. Right back here in the distance in the center where my eye is being led by the direction of the perspective, I'm going to take a fan brush, use that same color that I just put down here, and I'm going to build a little bit of a cloud bank area. So I'm using a smaller brush so that I can kind of swirl a late evening cloud bank way in the distance and put a little more impact in that area. As I kind of twist and stir this brush, I keep it light and airy, and I can swirl the colors around, actually dancing the brush on the canvas to create a little movement of dissipating type clouds. If you want to get more color interest, try a little alizarin and blue, or even a touch of violet, but mix in the same mixing spot. And don't get too dark so that you have a little bit of a violety gray. The other colors mixed into this will keep the colors kind of drab, and that's what I'm looking for in this, is a little bit of drab tinting. Okay, this is a little more of a deeper blue shadow color for more clouds, kind of shadow clouds. Let's just call them shadow clouds at the moment. And they get built right on top of the grays, and dance them in or swirl them in. And let's make a little bit of a cloud bank coming from over here. Kind of just break it and float it down a little bit to keep your eye being pulled in towards the center. Anything that gets a little too abrupt, just while the brush gets dry, tickle it a little bit. And it'll just melt right into the other wet oils. I hope I mentioned that these are oil paints so that you'd realize that as I'm putting these paints on, they stay wet and allow me to work in them a long time. If I were working with acrylics, which I do occasionally, you have to work a little more rapidly because once they dry, they don't soften. You get a hard edge, and it's a little more difficult to soften down into it. So that begins to give me, again, some more interest. Maybe a little shadow bottom back over here and just lightly tone down that in that pink. I don't want that pink to be too strong, so that is the distance. The water area, I'm going to find a little darker for the deeper horizon and pull that in just way back there. See how I just kind of skim over the existing wet paints? That pretty well covered that. Now with the fan brush, I'm going to restate my light areas. I wanted to get a little wet paint so that I could work into it. So I'm going to go back to the fan brush clean, go back to some white, and this is my soft white. You could use thick tube white like a titanium white. I have some down on the palette, but I want to warm this up without getting too bright and bring a little bit more sunlight play up in here just as the sands come. Now you'll see when I've stroked this on there, it looks very light, although it does have some yellow ochre in it, and I'm going to pull little strips of light and break up the sand. I want the dark underneath, so if I pull into this, I can get that little bit of a perspective look, and then I still have areas I can build grass on, and I can bring the lights on the sands as they filter down. So again, it's melting right into it. I'm painting wet on wet with my oil paints. A little bit more over in here. And now you can see that pink tone, it actually softens into the pink so that that pink is almost not visible. So I like to do that so that I get these nice subtle combinations or diffused edges rather than strong edges. In the area here, I want to darken a little bit first where the water would be just seeping into the sand. I think I'll switch brushes to a little bit smaller fan brush. Get a little more brown, a warm brownish gray. And I'm using a small brush so I don't get too much paint on the area. I want it to be a little wetter and stained. See how that really pops out of there? That almost makes that look like a white now, but I'm going closer to the water and strengthening that vanishing look, but then it weakens as it goes down the beach. It also tapers and narrows. So I put that in there. Let's just go ahead and sweep the beach. This is a fan brush. I apply it on and lightly stretch it up onto the sand, not into the water because I don't want the water. So that kind of popped out the water edge just slightly. I think I'll soften that just a little bit. All right, so that works pretty easily. A fan brush is a very handy tool. And then we'll bring the white foam over that. So that gave me a little extra power of dark. In fact, if I just kind of lay it down and let it streak into the water a little bit, it'll give me a nice soft edge there. So all this is just going with the flow of both the water onto the sand. Maybe a little stronger as I come down in little patches, little streaks in there, so it looks like it reflects a little bit some extra shadows. Then it hits into the drier sand. I don't think we need to do too much more in distance. While I have this little fan brush, I think I'll suggest some of the grasses. The grasses are put on fairly easily with a little fan brush. I'll use a little bit of the burnt umber, adding a touch of green. You want your grasses on the beaches to be kind of dried, so it's more brown than green. And we'll come up and we'll start thinking about the lay of the land as it comes up the slope here, and I'll set just a little bit of paint kind of down a ridge, just underneath where I feel the sky should stop, and then I just kind of tiptoe. You don't want it too straight, so I'll just let that fade back, maybe skip an area. And then if I lift on it just barely, it'll start to give a little suggestion of the grass growth, although you don't want much in there because that would bring it too close in detail. So you can keep that pretty distant back there. Let's get a little more paint on there. And I want it just to really come right down in a thin edge, right down to that distant vanishing point. So it's really tapering and diminishing. As I come down a little farther, with the same brownish green, I'm going to put another stripping in to create a little more perspective. I leave the white sand there and kind of build a little ridge underneath the light sand, and then I lift up and get a little grassier. So I'm looking for patches. I'm kind of spot sodding in areas. And the cooler blues that were from my sky become shadow sand. So you can do some nice little interesting suggestions in here. And of course, I'm not trying to make it too neat or too pretty. This stage, it's still a block in. We need a little more warmth in that. I think I'm going to go to straight burnt umber, and that'll put the grasses a little dried, a little more brownish. Sometimes I'll even put some ochre in there and put some sunlight in it. So that begins to bring the grasses just not quite too healthy, but they're definitely angling down towards the shore. So this is a little bristle fan that works quite well for that. One illusion that I would like to touch on before I get into the little footprints and some interesting, maybe some seaweed patches, are down in here, the white. I'm going to use this time tube white because it will grab a little better. The basic white, oil white, is a little too easy flowing, and we want to try to create these little patches of the foam as it comes in. Now first I'm going to kind of tap right along that same area and get a little bit of application of paint, and I'm just tapping with the straight edge of the fan brush, and then I'm going to start pulling it out to sea so that I get this little bit of a shoreline light, and some of the areas need to be stroked just slightly. And I want a lot of foam wash, I guess you could call it. As it comes in the foreground, you would see a little more of the bubble indication. And so we will see a little bit more of the actual dots and dabbles of the color. It's pretty effective, even though the illusion can be worked on and developed. You still have that line of perspective going there. And even a palette knife can sometimes break it into a sharp edge line. But I'm allowing the fan brush to do the work for me today. So you have quite a few options available to you. So that kind of gives that in that distance. A few little pulls up on the shore as the waves wash in, just breaking in the distance, they will look smaller. So just a few little pulls to the left will look like a lapping wave, and just break the edge once in a while and pull it over the darker sand. And you can see how that begins to softly melt into the distance. Okay, they're actually mixing light colors and dark colors all at one time. While I have the light on the brush, it wouldn't hurt to go in and maybe put a few little puffs or lights on the clouds. Maybe just over a dark edge you can tap a little bit of white and then tickle the bottom edge of that color so it kind of softens into a dark tint. So look for a dark area, put a little white just above it, and again this is your tube white, your thicker white, so that you can get this little bit of a, oh, I don't want to call it a silver lining to the clouds, but a little bit of a light flow and puff to it. This is kind of, oh, it could be almost noon time. If I wanted to create a shadow patch, I could probably take a little bit of a shadow and put some fence in here. Oh, there's just a lighthouse. There's a million things that can be added to this. But the basic structure of the fan brush, the block end, hopefully will help you as you try to develop a scene and create a perspective going into the middle of your canvas, more so than looking out to the ocean. Okay, I'm going to use the knife for just a minute, a little bit more white, and see if I can get a little bit more of this edge, a little sharper edge right on the front of that. See how when I press with the knife, it gives me a little bit of a push in, and it gives me in the foreground a little more interest, and I'm just kind of blending to the right with a knife rather than a brush. That gives me a little crisper roll of paint there. Now usually there's a little seaweed area where after the water has washed up, you can put a little bit of dibbles and dabbles of paint. And again, prospectively, you just kind of break it along there, kind of a weed line, but just tap it in there and sprinkle a little seaweed down on the moist edge of the sand and change colors, maybe a little ochre and green together, both on the brush, and put other little taps of color. It makes it a little more interesting. If you want to, you could put footprints. Now, footprints are a little different illusion. I'm going to use a small brush because I want small footprints. And this is a flat brush, kind of a synthetic. And what I'm going to do is come down and get a little bit of cooler blue sky color, a little bit of brown in it, and get just some kind of a bluish gray. And hope this isn't too dark for that area. And I'm getting it on one side of the brush, then I'm going to get some of my lighter color on the other. There's not too much paint on the brush, but if I want the little feeling that someone has walked into the drier sand, you don't do this too much in the wet sand. But over in here, you can make little imprints of footprints. And I just touch, I put the darker value, had it upside down, to the top and the light to the bottom. The reason the dark is on the bottom is it's concave and the light is hitting the rim. So you need your light down and your dark up, and that will put an indent into the sand. I'm suggesting little footprints in the sand, and they too would prospectively just diminish, lighter and lighter. Let's do that again. I don't think the camera really captured that. This is kind of a gray with a little bit of light, come up with the light to the bottom, and when I press, using the side of the brush held horizontally, I want a darker imprint. And see how it looks like there's an indent with a light on the rim of the footprint. And of course, you can have footprints in the sand. Okay, we need to go over here and block in this corner more. Next, a seagull would add some more interest. Little shells, a little bit of spatter painting. Now, I've done that in a number of the recent shows, but I think just a little bit of light color. The shells on the beach, the crushed shells, will sometimes sparkle and glisten. So right down on the bottom, if you just take a little bit of dots, and it'll almost look like broken pieces of shell in there. I've done one show where I did a large conch shell, and it was a much more foreground illusion. But I didn't have the perspective. You didn't even see the back line of the beach. So this has a different feeling to it. I think we need a little light on the grasses, just a little ochre tapped in a few spots. That puts a little bit of light filtered in. And I'm just going back, restating some of it, wipe the brush, and just kind of letting it soften in, sometimes lifting up. And it mixes with the wet oils, and you don't want to go too far into the distance, and create more interest. The liner brush, I could really make that grass more individualized, or I can use the handle and just kind of scratch a few little pieces in. That kind of loosens it up so that it doesn't look too neat and tidy, not too much like eyelashes and like it's cut off or cropped grass or mowed grass. That's what we don't want. Let's see if we can get a seagull in there. I think we've got plenty of time to play with this one. So we're going to thin down some paint. Let's come down to the palette and mix up kind of a brown and a blue with some white, kind of a blue-gray, and I'm putting thinner in it. And I'm trying to mix a color as I'm working here that's fairly dark, not a charcoal. And I'm loading the brush heavily, and that's a little juicy. And then I'm going to take a little stroke down into my soft white and just get on the tip of the brush. Let's come up and see if you can see this. Right on the tip of the brush, I allowed myself to get a little clip of white. And most of the brush has the dark in it. See if you can really come in close on this particular brush. See the dark on the brush? Well, over here on the other side is a little tip of white, which is going to allow me to create a seagull, which is going to already have the light on him. I need some interest in this area, so I'm going to just kind of drag the brush as I come down. That's going to be one wing. Then I'm going to cross over, make a little uplift, press a little harder, and whoops, he's got a broken wing, I think. Let's bring him a little body in there. Turning the dark towards the canvas, and we're going to block in the dark. Get a little, I wipe the brush out. I'm going to get a little more dark, and we're going to darken. I tell my students that sometimes to really connect the wing to the body edge, right under his wing pit, or right there, you put a little deodorant on, or a little dark spot, so there's a shadow in that pit of the wing connection. And that usually gives a good effect. His beak, or the wing tips, are dark. I'll reload the brush with a little bit of low Van Dyke would be a good color. Don't want it to be too dark. And we'll extend his wing tips. Now this one's a fairly large bird, but I'm going to lift up on the tips, feathering them just slightly. This one is further away from us, so I don't want it to be quite as large. Give him a little beak, little number 1. Shadow under his chin. Well, he's a little bit chunky. Have to put him on a diet. Put a little more rim over his edge and a little light on his tail. Well, let's see if we can get that light on his tail in here. Just a little glint of light. Usually they have a dark marking up underneath their tail, so we'll see if we can get that little fan look under his tail. Sometimes I use the blues from the sky to make a nicer accent of a under color on its belly, but you can really develop this one and do some smaller birds on there. Take your time, develop the grasses. That's another area, but these little seaweed things, put shells in them. Have a lot of fun with this one. I think you'll be able to do a simplified illusion and get a vanishing in the perspective on this. Join me next time when we paint another painting in foils.